Um, anyway, it's nice to see you. Welcome to my show, Fuller Explanations. Uh, this is going to be part of my documentary based on um, I Homeless, that manual that me and another homeless individual that I knew that I met at the shelter worked on, and other people that I was talking to about these ideas. And their we had an exchange of ideas, and we kind of like hashed it out, and I typed it up. I know from my experience and from talking to others what it's like at the homeless end. I was wondering what it's like at your end as a case manager. Some of the challenges that you have, and maybe you can share some rewarding experiences and memories of something. Oh, wow, I felt really good because I was able to
Well,
get this for someone.
so I've worked in the shelter and in the day center, and right now I work in the prevention side.
Okay.
So it's the trying to keep people from ever ending up in the shelter. And there's rewarding parts to both. You get to know the clients in the shelter better and form a connection and a relationship with people. And that's probably the best part about working in the shelter and in the day program is getting to know people, and that's, I think, the most rewarding part of the job is getting to meet so many different people and seeing just how strong and amazing everyone really is. And we all have our talents and our strengths, and that is wonderful. On the prevention side, I've been doing for quite a while now. It's always wonderful to have somebody that you can change the course. So now I know this person doesn't have to end up losing their home. Their children don't have to end up coming to shelter. That is probably, that's obviously an amazing feeling when you have, the ability to divert somebody from ever having this homeless experience.
Yeah.
Because it's incredibly traumatic to end up in the shelter, especially seeing children in the shelter. So it's been remarkable to see how many people need assistance that maybe never would have thought they would, and we've seen that with the pandemic. Prior to that, it was kind of like, okay, most of the people coming in for rental assistance, they really were very low income. It was easy to, see the instability was already there. You had some cases where something big would happen, like their child would be diagnosed with cancer. They'd have to stop working. They'd get through the treatments, and now they're going to lose their home. Well, that's incredibly, it's tragic. That's what happens. It's amazing that there's programs to keep people in their homes in these situations.
That's good knowing that.
With COVID, it's like everybody got hit.
Yeah.
And so people that had never fallen behind, had never been late on rent before, never been late on a bill before, all of a sudden, were furloughed, found themselves with, having to stay at home. You can't, if your child's doing e-learning and they're 6, you can't really let them e-learn unsupervised. Right. So all of a sudden almost all people were at risk of losing their housing, it seemed. And we've done an amazing job in suburban Cook County, I feel, across the various agencies at getting the funding out to prevent people from losing their housing. We could have seen a much worse crisis with people being on the streets. So we've that's definitely, it's really quite amazing to be able to realize, this child doesn't have to come to shelter. But I miss being in shelter. I will say that. I think you do get to know people. You get to, share your life and their life. You spend as for well the short time you were in shelter, we saw each other every day.
Yeah.
You get to know your caseworkers and the staff that work there, and they get to know you, and we're all rooting for each other. And I think it is wonderful to see how the clients in shelter are so supportive of each other. I know you mentioned Mickey early on, and he has people look out for him.
Yeah, that's good.
It's interesting to see that he also looks out for for the stragglers.
There's moments where he can, get points across, and
Absolutely.
then it gets a little bit, garbled because of his, his situation. And I don't want to, talk too much about that, of course, but I mean, that was
But
one of
you
my first
see that.
experiences, and I have this infinity for him because of that conversation. I was able to be where I am now. It was like the genesis of it.
I mean, and you would probably, your time in the shelter, you'd think, wow, how can all of these people manage to get along day after day, night after night, when they're, it's not a great situation. You're kind of stressed.
Right.
But amazingly, there were, there are a couple arguments,
Yeah.
disagreements, but nothing ever
Nothing major.
like what you'd see on TV.
Right.
Um,
The TV does kind of exaggerate it. I've seen disagreements and stuff, and maybe someone, that might have, a problem with substance abuse or drinking, and they were a little bit unruly, but it didn't get out of hand. They were just told to leave, and everything was fine. It wasn't the big drama, that you see.
even that rarely happened. Usually,
Very rare, yeah.
if things, people started grumbling with each other, all you have to do is say, quiet down.
Right.
Everybody
Exactly.
quiets down. And
I never felt like my safety was an issue or threatened. I was afraid that would happen. It's like you've seen it in the movies and TV.
yes,
It's almost like going to jail, but not quite as bad.
yeah.
It was a little bit scary. Daybreak had more people because it was a different structure, And my first experience, it was a bit rough, but over time, you get to know people, and it ended up being not so bad. And then each place had its own uniqueness to it,
Right.
its strengths and weaknesses and stuff. But it was nice to be able to get to know the people from both ends, both that need the help and those that were offering it, And I often empathized with you guys as well, because sometimes I'm sure you would come in a situation that were, kind of frustrating because you want to help them, but they, for whatever reason, there's complications and obstacles, either because they have unresolved issues that they need work on, and then that takes time, and you guys provide them help if they're willing to accept it. And it's sometimes sad because sometimes they're not willing to go through with it,
Yeah.
and they want to give up
It's tough.
too easily. So it gets tough and frustrating, and then you have the emotional bondings. I can imagine, case managers working with the family, and they would cry together, laugh together, and you almost become like family, with them, because the emotional bonding can't help but be made,
There's
Um,
definitely bonds that get formed. No, it's true. There's disappointments.
Yeah.
There's times when people are too sick to get to move through the process. The biggest frustration though is the lack of funding.
Yeah.
That it's the lack of. It's that there are more people that need the supportive housing than there are supportive housing placements available. So that's, I think, the biggest frustration. Um, there's, I think, people have these views of what it is to be homeless, that some people think that there's emergency housing, that if you become homeless, all of a sudden you call a number and there's emergency housing where you can just show up and have an apartment. And I always think to myself, so you think all these other people that are sleeping outside, that are homeless, that are in shelters, they just said, no, thanks, I don't want an apartment of my own. Because that's sometimes what I want to say. There is just not enough, there's not enough funding so that we can get everybody into housing quickly. So that's my biggest frustration. The other one is, I think that there's people that are scared to go to a shelter because of the other side of it. This idea that they're dangerous, that they're, the fear. So, and yeah, I would say you could go to any shelter, and on any particular night, it could be a bad night and you get a bad feel for it. But for the most part, our shelter at Beds, and I would say in general, they're pretty safe. I've never felt unsafe being at shelter. I've felt tired. I felt grumpy. I've felt cold because it's the middle of winter. It hasn't always been like just a dream, but I've never felt unsafe.
Right.
So that would be the one thing I'd say, is that the shelters are not as dangerous as you might think. And then the caseworkers are generally, I would say generally there to help you. So you're going to have some that you like more than others, but go through the steps of the process.
And some I think their caseload was just so unmanageable.
Right. That's a big problem.
Especially if you have a big place, but you don't have that. You have more people than you have staff. That you have more homeless that you're helping, and got staff of maybe like, I don't know, 25, 30 people, but you're like 200 people. Maybe that's not 200 people, but I mean, in the community, not just in homeless, but those that you're trying to prevent.
Right.
And
so that can definitely take a toll on things. So but you did, one of the things you've done in your time is you did the paperwork. You were willing to give Bruce a chance. I mean, he's basically said to you, I'm going to get you into Housing Forward, where you were lottoed out of. A lot of people would say, I'm not going down that road again. Sorry. Got a nice voice, good hair, but I'm not doing that. But you were willing to take that chance. And that would be my other piece of advice. Whether you're trying to prevent homelessness, take the chance, do the paperwork, fill out the application, especially when we get towards the end of our funding cycle. We don't necessarily know if there'll be funds left by the time you get to your appointment. But what if there are, and you just didn't make the appointment because you're like, well, there's not a guarantee. Make the appointment. You might be pleasantly surprised.
Exactly. For me, it seems to be easier to have a better, I guess, attitude than some. I always feel a bit more positive, even though sometimes I felt kind of negative at times. Who doesn't? But it would be frustrating seeing people with not all the time, but some people having just negative attitudes, but it doesn't go the way they expected or want it to go. And it gets a little frustrating because there's like a diva mentality that you would run into from time to time. They complain about the food quality, and the food was good. What's wrong with you? We ate well. I never felt that the food was inadequate, except for one place, one time, and that was out in the southern suburbs. We had it was like hot dogs and beans or something, but that was not typical. That was probably on an off day. It's not maybe
Yeah.
that was like maybe the only bad food experience, but everywhere else it was, they had chicken, and beef. One time I remember at daybreak they had um, uh, what's that? Prime rib, and that's
Oh,
unusual.
yeah,
That
fancy.
was yeah, that wasn't typical, but it was a nice surprise to have. And turkey for Thanksgiving and so on, and to have people.
I think that's the one thing that I noticed the most in the shelter, if you want to talk about food, is that you'll have turkey from Thanksgiving all the way up until about a week before Christmas.
Right.
And you'll have ham for the next month.
Uh-huh.
You'll have a lot of turkey night after night because everybody wants to make you a turkey.
Yes.
And then pretty much everybody wants to make you a ham.
Right.
Um, you might actually get corned beef for the full week of St. Patrick's Day because everybody wants to make corned beef, even if it's not St. Patrick's Day. If it's close, they want to make it. So sometimes you get a little bit like too many Thanksgivings in a row because everybody wants to do their turkey. So
Yeah.
sometimes it can be a little humorous that way.
Right.
We definitely get a lot of people that want to volunteer in the shelters between Thanksgiving and New Year's.
Mhm.
And they're really not looking to be regular volunteers, but this is the time of year people really want to. So that can be a challenge, but it also is a great opportunity for people that aren't experiencing homelessness to get a sense of what shelter is and is not, and become more empathetic and get a better view of what a person that is homeless looks like. Because most people that are in the shelter, they just look like our family. They look like
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. They
There's
don't.
not a
They're not all dirty with the, alcohol in a paper bag.
there's not very
Nothing
many,
like that.
yeah, we don't, I mean, you don't often have too many homeless people in the shelter.
Exactly. You can't really even tell.
I mean, every once in a while you get somebody who it's almost like they went to the Halloween store and got the costume,
I have ran into that. This one guy,
but not often.
had the actual stick with the handkerchief
Oh yeah, he
wrapped
really,
around it. I don't know what that's called, hobo stick or whatever. He really looked the part, but that wasn't typical.
most of the
Sometimes they
time,
put in so well that they might look like they're about to travel somewhere but not get on the train.
that's true.
Then that's how okay they might be homeless then. But other than that, it's not like it's so obvious. People
Right.
always think of the person with the cardboard sign all the time, and of course you get that too, but that's
But not
not
as
the only example.
No, most of the people in the shelter, so that's the benefit for people having a chance to volunteer or a chance to spend time with clients in shelters, people that are homeless, is that you're like, oh, this person looks like me.
Right.
They dress like me. They, do their hair like me.
Right.
They eat the same foods. They complain about the same things. Like we both like the same teams. You find that there's a lot of similarities and there's fewer differences. And that's, I think, really important. It's why when you go to the shelter, it's not dangerous because the people in the shelter are just your everyday people. There's some
Absolutely.
people that have serious substance use issues.
Right.
And there's some people that have really very severe mental health issues. But a lot of people in the shelters are just old. I mean, that's part of it. I think when you talked about the lady who was 67.
Yeah.
What's that called? that's one of the biggest frustrations, whether it's homeless prevention, trying to prevent evictions, or homeless shelter, is that a lot of people that are in shelter, it's because they just don't have enough income
Right.
to afford housing. For somebody that's on Social Security, whether it's disability or retirement income, they probably can't afford housing. So one of the best ways to avoid homelessness that I will tell people is just don't ever get old. Because if you do, you might not have enough income to live off of. You should also avoid, any form of disability, which includes, getting in a car accident.
Right.
Includes, any health conditions, because it's that income that really makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, that's very true. Now you were saying earlier about like the homeless, experience, and I forget how you worded it, but it reminded me of a conversation that I had with someone at one of the shelters, and each place has they're different case managers. They come from a different type of perspective. Unfortunately, not all of them are going to be like you and Bruce and Ben and so on. Sometimes you're going to get someone that might lack a little bit of empathy, maybe because they've seen so much bad stuff that it kind of jaded them a little bit and they're a little bit out of touch. And we were thinking, and I kind of agree, for everybody, regardless if they're empathetic to begin with, like you and Bruce and Ben and so on, or not so much, the whole spectrum, I think it would behoove them to have like a homelessness experience, to be sent out like even during the winter with about the same amount of money as someone like getting on SSI, and have them see what it's like doing what homeless do in those situations. So they know what it's like. Like if maybe they don't have a car and having to wait for the bus and trains and all this sort of thing to troubleshoot certain problems when they don't have certain luxury. Well, what is it like for them? So then they know what it's like, and they know when people are seemingly needy, that you would understand a little bit better if you went through these experiences. And I don't mean you or anyone at Bed. In general, because every so often you're going to come across that situation. I think everyone would actually benefit from that, because then they know exactly what it's like, even if they already had empathy and they don't need any more because they kind of already have it up. But at least you'll know like what challenges to expect and anticipate. So there's a lot of reasons to have, not just for the empathy, but for an educational experience of getting a perspective that you wouldn't otherwise have. That if then what's lacking from seeing it from the other perspective, because you have the knowledge of what the shelter situation is, what's reasonable, what isn't, and all of that. We don't have any of that information. We don't know what's reasonable, what isn't, and what the timeline would be. But if you had that information and all that knowledge, and you were put in that situation, all of a sudden, okay, I'm going to experience the homeless situation, even though, of course, you have an apartment or you have a vehicle. But if you did away with all that, and if you just went through the process undercover or as part of your training or something, I think it would give people the perspective of maybe how to be even more efficient. You would see from a perspective that you weren't able to see from before, that you couldn't even imagine, and we couldn't even articulate it, maybe. But you or someone who has the background is able to see it, can articulate, can see where certain things are lacking, because even in the best agencies and organization where everything is, running smoothly, and even when they have adequate funding, et cetera, there's always going to be something that needs to be tweaked in a certain way that you would never even think of before, and we may not even be able to articulate because we just don't, um, we don't we don't really have a basis to kind of, we don't have, not that we're dummies, but we don't have the educational background to be able to articulate certain things in a way that would make sense to you, and then you would understand it if you went through it and like, oh, okay, this is what we need to do. I was homeless at this one place and this happened and this happened and this happened, and oh my God, they're going through this too. If I went through it, we need to change this and change that, and tweak it around to be able to be, if for no other reason, a little bit more, perhaps a little more efficient in certain elements, or I don't know how else to put it.
No,
Not that you're inefficient, but you know what I mean.
I understand what you're getting at. I think that for me, not going, I think I prefer listening to the stories and just trying to do really quiet listening to people.
Right.
Because what I've learned is that even if I did what you were describing, I would only come away with my opinions about what I did and didn't like about this day in the life of being homeless. Because from listening to our clients and the day center, there's what I've learned is that not everybody finds the same things bad or good.
True.
Like some of the clients are very frustrated that they are seen as invisible and nobody comes up and talks to them. Others are very upset that they feel so visible.
Yeah, they want to be invisible. Yeah.
And I'm like, well, then this is an impossibility. Nobody can be happy.
Right. Well, maybe just a little bit visible, a little bit transparent.
But I also find that you start to get some common themes when you listen. And one of them that I'll bring up is dinner time. Because I've heard so many times from people, and sometimes I'll even just ask to kind of keep a confirmation that this is a typical thing people don't like. People don't want the case managers to bother them at shelter.
Yeah.
For the most part, unless that's the only time the person has available, when they get to the shelter at the end of the day, they want to eat dinner, watch TV, go to bed, which is actually what a non-homeless person wants to. So again, but it didn't occur to me that the fact that the caseworkers at the shelter were like, oh, we can get some work done because I've got everybody captive. This is great. Nobody's leaving. Everybody's here. Paperwork. But from listening and just actually listening, not just sitting there, tuning out, I realized, oh crap, people don't like that. I've got to stop. I've just got to show up. What people want me to do is just show up, let them eat dinner, not bother them. So I think that would be the other side of it, is really we need to spend more time not commenting, not even reflecting back, but just spending that time listening, hearing what it is that our clients in our neighborhood, in our area, are frustrated by and like or dislike, because it also could be very different being homeless in the Chicagoland suburbs than it would be in downstate Illinois. The weather's not that different, but again, the idea that you could take the metro for a couple hours doesn't exist.
No, not there, I guess. No.
Right. So I think it's just listening is probably, because I don't know if I think if I spent a day trying to do because there are sometimes people will do this. They'll do I'll be homeless for a night experiment. But I think I I mean, I know I get to go home. I
Right.
can't forget that. I
No.
know that if I'm hungry today, well, I will be able to eat whatever I want tomorrow. I honestly would cheat and plan to wear the appropriate clothing because I'm going to cheat on this experiment and
Right.
not just pretend I got kicked out in the middle of the night with only what I had. I will make sure I wear the right shoes, and I have good shoes because I haven't been slowly going from place to place, losing my belongings.
Right.
I think I would leave with a warped idea of what it was. I would cheat. I would cheat. And I
Yeah,
think most of my
that's human
friends,
nature to do that. Like I remember when I was trying to film some scenes in Joliet, I kept on putting it off because the weather was just so
you
horrible.
were cheating.
Yeah, I was cheating, because when I was homeless, I didn't have a choice about the weather. I had to be homeless and outside in all kinds of weather, cold, hot, and it would get hot and it was horrible, and then rainy, and then I had to walk with holes in my shoes and stuff like that. And
And that's, yeah,
when I went there a couple months ago, whenever it was the dead of winter. I met up with Rosalind and we hung out. That's my half sister,
yeah.
for those who don't know. Um, she helped me film. I had the point of view like glasses. There
Yeah.
were shades. So I was able to get things literally from my perspective. So I kind of retraced my steps a little bit, and it was cold and it was miserable, but it wasn't quite as bad. I mean, I've had a lot worse. But walking, through the snow in certain areas, I had to walk on the street, and it reminded me how bad it was.
Right.
So when I was out there about 10 years ago, it was a kind of a little bit triggering. It was a flashback because I remember walking home when I was homeless, when I was going from the library back to the shelter. There was a snowblower, this guy in this moving snow, not a snow blower, but it was like, thinking that he drove the snowplow, I guess. And
Yeah.
it's like he didn't see me. I felt invisible, and he almost kind of ran into me. I had to kind of almost jump out of the way. The snow came up, and if I didn't get out in time, I would have been buried underneath it. And maybe he would have ran over me. Who knows? It was very frustrating. It was very degrading. And that's something I'm like, okay, here's where I am feeling invisible, where I would like to be seen.
Well, and it's just a whole experience
Yeah.
that I don't think I would do justice to the experience because I would know I'm not really homeless.
True. Yeah, I thought about that too, because you would always be able to quit at any time when it became too difficult. But I think the only way to do it was just to drop you off in the middle of nowhere, create a place to get you stranded. Because homelessness is really kind of being stranded. I've been housed and then also stranded at the same time. And stranded, even though you have a home, you have that feeling of homelessness, even though it's temporary. You can't wait getting back home. When I couldn't wait to get back home, or from doing that video thing, I was so grateful, almost moved to tears, because I knew no matter how uncomfortable I was at that moment, walking through the snow, some of that ice going into my shoes, I knew when I'm done here tonight, I get to sleep in a nice bed, and it's gonna be real comfortable. It's almost too warm because I have to have the AC on sometimes. That's how warm, because I have the floor heating, and it gets a little too warm sometimes. I have the fan on. I thought during the winter I was going to save a lot of money by not having the fan, and I had the fan at least to circulate the air, but I need something. And then sometimes, I kid you not, I put on the AC because it gets a little too warm. The thermostat I have almost completely off, so I don't know why it's so warm. Not complaining because at least I'm not freezing. So you take that for granted. And I can always go home and cheat, like you said. That's a good point.
You can always go home and cheat. And the other thing that I've noticed because of the building, So I get to kind of observe what happens when people go from being homeless, they move into Ogden Avenue, and then how their lives change over the next year or years. And I think you've seen it with yourself.
Yeah.
One of the big changes is people's relationships come back once they're in housing. But when people are in the shelter, especially if they've been homeless for a while, they lose the relationships, and you can't experiment with that
I
for a
don't know
day.
exactly what you mean by that. Lose their relationships.
So you spend more time with your sister and have a more equal relationship now
Oh, I see.
with housing, right?
Right.
Um, and so I see that with our clients. A lot of times they move into the building, they move into an apartment, and all of a sudden, within the next 6 months, they're talking to their siblings for the first time, sometimes in a decade. Um, if sometimes they have adult children that they haven't really communicated with in a long time, friends that they lost touch with, and most people do. But now that they're housed, they're people become invested in rekindling
Yeah,
relationships.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
And
Connecting.
some of it's just like you said, you can have people over when you've got an apartment.
Yeah.
So you can have and maintain relationships.
Right.
And it's that, when you're stranded, if you're truly stranded, if you can pick up a phone and call somebody and they can help you out, and all they have to do is something small, and next thing you know, you're home, you're not really, you're fine, you're okay. And
Right.
you
Yeah.
have that because you've got a home and you've got lots of relationships
Yeah.
that
Well,
you
I've
put
been in a
time and
situation.
energy into.
My phone was dead, and I was stranded. I had no one to reach out to, and I had to revisit being homeless for a night.
Yeah.
About a year ago, I'd say,
Yeah.
and when I was in New York, I remember kind of being stranded one time. I miscalculated my situation, of how much money I would need, and then I stayed at a shelter because I was staying at hostels.
Yeah.
I would get there cheap. I would take the mega bus. That was one thing that Bruce told me about that I loved, because going there was like $45 round trip, and if I knew about that sooner, I would have done that sooner. But anyway, I was in New York, and I would stay at the hostels in New Jersey at the time. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm usually here only for like a day, and I would come back. I thought one time I would try for about a week. And
Yeah.
part of the time, like 3 or 4 days, I'm at the hostel, it's already paid for, but there's like food expenses and stuff like that too.
Okay.
And it's more expensive in the city there. And then I stayed at a hotel, not hotel, I mean, at one of the shelters
Hmm.
somewhere in New York. I looked up online because I was able to at least to do that. And I stayed, it wasn't a bad experience, but it would just, it wasn't something I was used to, and the paperwork was kind of intimidating. I didn't know what I was signing. Had
Right.
interesting language, like it felt like I was signing a bank loan to buy a house. It literally said house loan on the paperwork, and I felt a little intimidated. I didn't know if that was on the up and up or if that was just how it was. But at least I was able to be there for a little while, and nothing bad ever happened, But I felt a little when I realized I didn't have quite enough money to continue with the hostels and stuff. I felt a little stranded, and I remember I had a friend that one time wire me money. I ran into an issue with that,
Yeah.
and they were able to come through, but I didn't always have that ability. One time I was there during the winter, and it was just I had to find a place to charge my phone, and I couldn't. I was like, it was like when I was homeless again,
It is
truly
there.
homeless. I was I was in New York and I can't just go back home. You know, I had to wait until it's
That's
time to
really,
go back home. So what do I do in between times? So I had to troubleshoot. So I
yeah,
was literally homeless in New York because I was stranded. It was a temporary situation because I knew all I had to do was wait until it was time to take the bus to go back
for the
home.
boss.
You know, and then money was back in my card because it coincided with the end of 1 month, the beginning of the other.
Yeah,
You know, so that it worked out okay. But for a little while, it was a literal return to homelessness because I was literally staying at a shelter. You
yeah,
know, and it was humbling. It made me reinforce my my attitude of not taking my housing for granted. You know, not that I ever would, but it just reinforced the reason why I don't. You know, so it was definitely a very humbling experience, and literally that's how stranded being stranded for a little while is kind of like a sneak preview of being homeless. So if you're not homeless and you happen to be stranded somewhere on the highway or something like that, that's
mhm,
kind of what it's like, but except for more long term. You
yeah.
know, and not everyone has a car, but even when they do, it gets cold in the car too.
It
You
does.
know, and you're vulnerable.
Well, and gas isn't free, so
Exact gas isn't free, and if you have a Tesla, I don't know, I don't know how you end up being homeless. Maybe you're homeless because you bought a Tesla or something, you know. But even that, you know, maybe your situation used to be good at one time and then it just went bad.
no,
You haven't had
that's
a Tesla, but it's still not. You know, you can't always find a place to charge it. You know, you're always going to have
it.
that struggle.
So,
So
and even if you find a place to charge it, it's still not free to charge it.
no, it's not free, and it takes about 3 hours or so.
No, there's,
And so there's a lot of challenges in there, you know, and but eventually, you know, like if you are stranded, you eventually make your way back home and you're okay. When you're homeless, you don't know how long that strandedness is going to
I
last.
think that's the big difference is you
Yes,
don't have there's not an end date.
no,
You don't know that you, even when you were in New York and you were revisiting homelessness, you had an end date. You just had to wait
yeah,
for the bus. It
right,
basically just needed, it was going to end as long as you made it to your bus, got on the bus, and got home.
right,
And so even if you, for people, as long as people have housing, you have an end date. You can do an experiment. You can strand yourself purposefully or not, but you do have an end date, and that's the probably the biggest challenge for a person that is homeless is that you don't have an end date. It could be even for you, and Bruce is like, this is the plan. He didn't know when the plan was gonna materialize.
no, no,
Um,
yeah. Even though he overquoted, you know, he really didn't know. He just knew it would eventually, you know.
he just had a faith, and he picked a number, and it turned out to be shorter.
Mhm.
But sometimes we pick a number and it turns out to be longer.
Right.
Um, it's
Exactly. And he built that into the conversation. It could be
yeah.
longer too, you know. So I
So
was
it's,
prepared for the worst and hoping for the best. And I was just very, very lucky.
you were, but you did make. I mean, your book, because I've read your book. Um, it brings up a lot of these things we've talked about. You took direction. You had faith in your caseworker, and you were very cooperative through the whole process. If so, we didn't. You had ID. That's great, but you needed a birth certificate. So rather than spend 3 weeks questioning why, if this was fair, you needed a birth certificate, you just
Yeah.
went and got the birth certificate. Um, I know, we need the proof of income. So you get the proof of income. We need, there's so many, we need you to fill out this form again. And so you filled out the form again. And those seem like such small things, but those are the things, as you put in your book. It's about just going through the motions of this. take advantage of the opportunities, fill out the paperwork, take
Yeah, be
direction.
patient. The payoff is worth it, because if I had quit, I wouldn't have been where I am now. And before that, for the 7 years that I was at the first place in Berwyn, all of that just because I was too impatient, because it wasn't perfect. Well, being homeless is even worse. I mean, that was the best option I had going, and most
Well,
people don't have even
and
that.
even, I mean, being housed isn't perfect either. You've had to be
No,
paid
no,
since.
it's perfect. Oh, yeah,
Nothing's
there's so many issues, like, would you have to walk upstairs? How are your neighbors gonna be? Bed bug issues, whatever.
Yeah. And
But
it's true for anybody in an apartment, or even not, even if you buy a house, you still have problems. I
yeah,
mean, you don't, my
right.
parents, their basement floods all the time.
Mhm.
Nothing's, no, you're gonna have challenges. Apparently you have to use the air conditioning in winter.
Yeah, which exactly. Yeah.
But you've got to, I think you've, that spirit of work through the program, be very, be cooperative, and have that patience is really important.
Yes.
And
Patience pays off.
it does.
Yeah, trying to make it rhyme. So, yeah, what a journey it's been, and I'm glad that the worst is over, and I want to never be cocky and think, oh, it could never happen again, because it could. So, I follow along, with what I'm supposed to do. I don't, have like anyone over that's going to be disruptive. I had a problem, with a friend, and he later on was able to understand my rules. You can't, come here if you're going to. He had a problem with alcohol, and he's working on it right now, and he knows not to come over unless he's completely sober, because I don't want anything jeopardizing my
Yeah.
stay here, even if it wouldn't necessarily. Over time it could be, and I don't want to be on any neighbor's bad side. I want to get along with my neighbors, and I don't want any drama, and that sort of thing. And I'm glad that my friend is um, understanding that and making a lot of progress, and I'm really proud of him. And he knows who he is. I'm not gonna name drop, but I'm grateful for his friendship, and that he understands the boundaries, and he's respectful of that. And if anyone wasn't, I just wouldn't have them over. And I like having people over. I miss having company. Every so often, I'm able to have company, and it's not always easy to arrange because of scheduling and all this sort of thing. But it's nice to have people over and talk, and at least this is better than nothing. Face to face. To Zoom with technology is nice, but in person, nothing really beats that.
No,
But I
that's,
know in time, I'll be able to establish that again, that I
yeah,
wouldn't be able to do if I didn't have a home. It all
that's
starts
true.
with that.
No, that's very true. And you also are working, you're volunteering.
Yeah.
Um, so it's not just housing. It's not just that you've got an apartment. You've also your life has totally changed. I mean, you have this, I mean, you make a big difference at Beds.
I try. Yeah. I mean, especially, since you guys provided um, opportunities for me, I want to be able to pay it forward, so to speak. And I want to be able to take the time to help those that call, even if sometimes it seems kind of ridiculous. I see in the morning calling on a Sunday. Maybe calling a little earlier would have made more sense. Did you not see this was going to happen? Until just now. So it gets a little frustrating, and I feel a little bit like being a little snarky. But I, haven't been there in this situation. I'm able to push that aside and be able to help them out, looking up information for them, and pass it along. I don't know who else does that or doesn't. But at least I do that. Um,
Yeah.
and I like being able to make a difference. It
Well, I
feels
mean,
good.
I think that's the full circle of it, though, is that you have, at one point you were a client, but now you are one of the people that is helping the clients coming in, and that says a lot, that this is not just, these programs don't just, fill a gap and provide services. They do come full circle. A lot of you're not the only client that now is helping or providing, you know, support to others at Beds. We have a number of people that were at one time in shelter and now are giving back.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. I'm glad to see that, and I met, you know, like the person I relieve, he used to be in the shelter. We have a nice rapport. When I relieve him, we talk for a while. Very funny, uplifting guy. Maybe not everyone's cup of tea sometimes, but he's he's got some interesting stories, and we have a nice little banter back and forth, and all this sort of thing. And I appreciate the friendship that's growing that I wouldn't have had if I didn't have the opportunities in the beginning to be being housed. Now, the one thing, okay, being like someone that answers calls at night, even if it were a weekday or something, a weeknight, of course, it's limited. I was wondering though, if someone had the wherewithal to get the proper education and degrees needed to be a case manager,
mhm.
what would you recommend? What would be the requirements for them to be able to do that if they wanted to pursue that?
So I mean, we would be really looking for a background in psychology or social work. That would be the background for your coursework and
Like
how.
at least like a master's or a bachelor's?
No,
I'm
I
like,
think,
let's see.
I mean, ideally, we would be looking for a bachelor's with that background in social work or psychology. And then it, it just is really about, having some experience, which is usually you might get through an internship with your college. I think the experience is an important piece, because we find that a lot of times people think they want to work with the homeless,
Right.
but they don't.
Right. I mean, that's like when I thought I wanted to be a CNA because I did it for one family member or another since '95. When I was learning the craft at JJC to actually do it for real, when I saw what it's really like, I'm like, nope, I don't want to do that.
So
So I can get that. You don't know until you learn more about it.
I think the other thing is, if you say you have this, maybe you have a bachelor's and it's not in a social service related field, you're just looking for a change. I would say start off as you can always start off as a volunteer, and
Oh yeah, that's a nice way to start.
that's probably a good. That's I mean, and that is how I started. I actually didn't even hadn't finished college yet. Um, I was taking classes, but I spent 2 years volunteering at Beds before I was hired. It really is. It is a great way for people to have the exposure and get the experience.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. I was wondering though, like to get like the bare minimum like degree or whatever for like social work. How many years like is that?
So there's an applied science associate's degree in human services, and that takes about 2 to 3 years, depending on how fast you go. A bachelor's takes 4 to 5, and then for a master's degree, you're looking at, around 6 years total. So it just depends. It really does. And it depends on the person's background. What are they, what is your experience been? What were your previous jobs? But a lot of people come in and they started off as a volunteer, and then had the appropriate background experience in their education.
Yeah, now that's something I don't know if I would want to pursue for myself, but I was curious. I knew it wasn't going to be like you watch a 2-hour video.
No.
So becoming a security guard or something like that. There's not like a simple training or 6 to 8 week course. There's more involved, of course, but for some aspect, like like if I had a car, one of these days, like I want to be driving again, I want to do something maybe that involves outreach in some capacity, going there in person and being able to get them what they need in some situations, I don't know if that's my calling or not, but I do feel rewarded when I'm able to take down someone's information and pass it along. I mean, sometimes I worked on Wednesdays,
Yeah.
volunteering, and then something could be done. There's more that could be done. It just felt good that I was able to, make these connections. It was like a dispatcher,
Yeah.
of sorts, and hearing a little bit of people's story and their situation, and some of it similar, some of it not. I wanted to do everything I could to make sure that they got some sort of assistance or something to hold them over, and I would like to do like more of that, kind of what I'm already doing, but maybe a little more often. I don't know, it's something that I would like to think about, especially, I know as the summer goes on, and we get into better weather and such, if not this year, maybe next year, but I mean, it's something that I would like to move forward in, that seems to be something I think I'd like to do, at least to find out if I could do that. Maybe I find out that it's a little bit too much. I don't know, but it just felt so rewarding, and I wanted more of that feeling. I want to almost like a drug. I want more of that. Yes, I helped that person. That felt good. More of that, please. That type of thing. And it's a blessing to be able to be on that other side, having been on one side and now on the other side of that. It's such a rewarding experience, and I'm just doing a very little bit. But it just to be able to do that, and I was never in a position to do that before because I was in that position. How can I help anybody when I'm already in the same boat, So that's one way that I kind of look at it, and it's good to be able to talk to others, like you and for a while, Bruce, and to be able to get ideas and still guide every so often. I still need guidance with stuff,
We all do.
Exactly, and it may not be with homeless situation, but it's with maintenance and other things that I need to be able to get and move forward and excel at, and be able to acquire, be it the ride free program pass, or some sort of documentation, print out of something until I can get a printer or something.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to have the support center to be able to, even help me out, because I still need it here and there, I just don't need it as much Nothing, but I still need for the other things, you know. But anyway, it was nice having you. I think I'm gonna end this pretty soon because I think we covered all topics.
I think so.
I'm
You
getting a little
probably got
tired.
sleep.
Yeah, I need sleep, you know.
Yeah, you're starting to look sleepy.
A little sleepy, yeah.